With the biggest game of the season lingering here for the Denver Broncos, we're going to take a look at the offense, the defense, and the coaching side and see what are some of the biggest areas they must fix here before the season finale against the Kansas City Chiefs, where the playoffs are on the line. You're going to get that and much more on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day for all the Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more that you need. You get that here every single day, all year long. Thank you so much to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there for making us your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much as we ring in a new year here, and hopefully for the Denver Broncos, a lot of excitement and trending upwards in terms of the future, the direction of there. We're grateful to have you here. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. And here's what we got in store to bring in the new year here, Broncos Country, for you. We'll wrap up today's show by talking about the adjustments that this coaching staff needs to make in this final game here of the regular season for the Broncos, where there is a lot at stake for them. We'll also highlight how the defense can fix their communication issues that they've had, what things we'd like to see them do against Kansas City, regardless if the starters or the backups play. But we're going to kick things off today by highlighting why the Broncos need to find a way to run all over the Chiefs this week, set the tone from start to finish. It's a big, big game here in Broncos Country. So, Sayre, let's dive deep into it here. We're going to focus and kick things off on today's show by starting on the offensive side of the ball. And look, I would say in those last four games, the Broncos offense, they've had their moments where they've struggled, but they've been a reason that Denver's been in a position to win. You know, some of the games that they've had, obviously they're on a 2-game losing streak right now, but it's not necessarily because the offense in totality, when the offense is finding ways to put up points. Remember the days we've been sitting here doing this podcast for a long time where we were just begging, can the Broncos get more than 16 points in a game? We're well past those days now, but hey, this week against Kansas City, starters may or may not be playing here for Kansas City. Denver's offense needs to find a way to bring it against Steve Spagnuolo's defense, which that scheme's not going to change. He's still going to be aggressive.
No, absolutely. He's going to be aggressive, and I think that Broncos have to take advantage by basically just being able to kind of smash the ball on the ground at will. The running game has to continue to get going. We saw, obviously, in the most recent game against the Bengals, Jaleel McLaughlin had some nice runs, and before that, the game before that against the Chargers, it felt like Audric Estime ran the ball pretty well in the first half. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of a wall in both of those games, right? After the first half, the Broncos kind of went away from the run. And then the second half of the Bengals game, it was really more so of the runs not being quite as effective as they were early on in that game. So got to continue to smash the ball down the Chiefs' throats. And there's reasons for that beyond just we want to see the running game do well. In a game like this where you're expecting to play against a lot of backups, if you can run the ball effectively, you're shortening the game. You're shortening the game and saying, hey, like, we're not going to give them opportunities for any weird stuff to happen. We're going to have long, extended drives. We're going to be converting on third downs because we're setting ourselves up in favorable down and distance situations, and we're going to dictate this game at the line of scrimmage. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to do that, especially in a game where you're potentially facing off against Kansas City's backup guys.
Yeah, and look, we've had some comments about this. I know there's been some confusion. I think for people are saying, well, Kansas City's going to rest their starters. They're not going to rest 11 starters on offense, 11 starters on defense. It doesn't work that way. Like, you know, I think if people pay attention to it, you have this scenario where the game day inactives, you can only make 6 or 7 players inactive. Like, that's going to have to be one of the things you have to do from an emphasis. So it's more likely to be Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, maybe Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, some of these other guys, but you can only have 6 or 7 guys inactive. So that does mean that Kansas City is going to have several players that are starters, probably play some, but even maybe those backups might get more extended reps, and some of those other starters might be the backup in an emergency situation here. But man, I'm with you, Sayre. Like, and you go back to the Bengals game here. I know you brought up some great points about how the Broncos approached the Chargers game, but the thing that absolutely drives me nuts a little bit was, like, in that second quarter, Denver kind of went away from the run after they got, the run game was getting them down there. Obviously, they kicked the field goal to go up 3-0 at one point. But the thing I want to see Denver do more of, they recommitted to the run to start the second half. And what did it do? It opened things up. Bo Nix finds Cortland Sutton for a touchdown because of it. You go out and you take a shot downfield to Marvin Mims, 67 yards through the air, 51 yards in totality. That's because the run game was going. Like Jalil had a 9-yard run, an 11-yard run, a 13-yard run. And so the defense is changing like, oh, well, this guy's gashing us. We have to try to stop the bleeding. And then that's where those opportunities and those shots came from Bo Nix. So that's what you want to see. Like, commit to the run game. Like, that's my biggest thing this week that I'd love to see for the offense. I know you have it run all over them. Commit to the run game, but more importantly, Sayre, stick to the run game if it's working, and then open some things up. Far too many times this year, and I understand, like the Broncos, they haven't truly committed to the run game in a lot of different ways, but they've become too pass happy at times. And I think that's where the complaint about some of the coaching stuff that we've talked about and that a lot of Broncos fans have certainly brought up, they've kind of brought that up as well. It's because they don't commit to it when it's working and they go away from it when it does. Commit to it if it's working, and everything else, I promise you, will fall into place here.
Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly what we want to see happen. You want to see a complete game, just like we saw back in week, whatever it was, against the Atlanta Falcons, right? You want to see this offense just kind of firing on all cylinders. And it does start with the running game, because we know how good Bo has been off play action all season long. He's been one of the best in the NFL running off of play action, or throwing off of play action, excuse me. Wouldn't mind seeing a little bit of Bo Nix in the running game as well, Cody. I know we've mentioned that in the past, but we could definitely stand to see a little bit more of that. Put the game, if you want to put the game in his hands, maybe let him run the ball a little bit more, as we saw, I believe, against Kansas City the first time these two teams played. He was running the ball well, throwing the ball well. So let's see what Bo can do in that phase of the game as well. Also, Cody, what we want to see from the offense against the Chiefs, this is obvious, but touchdowns, not field goals. Like, I think you started off the game against the Cincinnati Bengals kind of setting the tone perfectly up until you got down into the red area and you had to settle for a field goal. And you had a really good drive that was cut short there. The Broncos against the Kansas City Chiefs, like, don't be settling for these field goals. Take points. I mean, I'm not saying leave points on the field, but man, find a way to get the job done, especially if you are going up against backups. Look, this Broncos team has been good enough to win 9 games against everybody else's best of what they're putting out there anyway. And if Kansas City's out there throwing the backups out there, I know those guys are still NFL ball players and things like that, but shoot, I mean, we can't sell the Broncos short either. Like, they're an NFL team playing their starters. And so you should be able to go out there and whoop them up a little bit. So go out there and finish drives. Make sure that, especially early in this game, get a cushion built. Allow that defense to pin its ears back. Finish these drives that you get early in the game, sustaining the run and finishing in the red zone. That's going to set this Broncos team up to be, I mean, pretty comfortable going into the half.
Well, and I always like when Denver finds a way to get it. Like, if they start a game 7-0, I've always felt more confident with them starting up 7-0 than if they fall down 7-0. I feel like at times if they've gone down 7-0, 10-0, it almost feels not quite like a death sentence and like how it used to feel. But it's like we've seen now that this offense can fight and claw its way back, which I think is a very promising development. And you're also now starting to see how teams are starting to play Cortland Sutton. I mean, if you look at the NFL Next Gen Stats newsletter against Cincinnati, on a majority of his snaps, Cortland Sutton was getting pressed at the line of scrimmage with the corner playing outside leverage, so they'd have a safety over the top. And at times they'd have a linebacker spying inside. That's really where you need other guys like Troy Franklin. Devon Vele had a great catch on that third down, but we didn't see much of Devon Vele after that in the offense. So if teams are going to play Cortland Sutton like that, there needs to be a game plan for the tight ends to have a bigger impact in the passing game. We know last time Denver played the Chiefs, Adam Troutman had a really big catch and run because the Chiefs, they were like, these guys don't run routes. These guys are just, they're in there to block and set things up. And they're like, oh, shoot, Adam Troutman, 37-yard catch and run. Get back to some of the things that are working. But even like you and I had said it in yesterday's show too, simplify some of the things. Like, let's see some slants. Let's just see some of those short to intermediate routes, because a lot of times teams are dropping those 6 to 7 defenders back in zone coverage and they're covering 2 to 3 different routes, right? So it's like, it's easier. You're at a numbers disadvantage when you're playing a zone like that, because usually when you're running 2 or 3 man routes, you're always going to have a vertical concept and you're going to have an underneath concept. So when you make it easier for teams to see that, like, it makes it hard. And then people get mad at Bo Nix. It's like, look at the design of the offense and watch how it all kind of builds. You need other things to help open things up. And that's where I say commit to the dang run game. That's going to open things up here for this offense. It's going to help Bo Nix be in a situation where he doesn't have to have a lot of pressure on his shoulders. but I also kind of like how Bo has responded at times there when there is pressure. No bigger pressure-filled situation than having to lead your team down the field with under 2 minutes, like a minute and 20. You have to go 70 yards to score to tie the game up against the Bengals. I loved what we saw from Bo in that situation. He didn't panic. He didn't blink. You love to see that. So there are some things, I think, some positives we have seen from it, but the offense can't just be as one-dimensional as it has been for the last handful of, weeks here. You got to find a way to open things up in all facets, especially if you're going to make a bid to get to the postseason. So Broncos country, we want to know what you want to see from the Broncos offense this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now we're going to shift our gears to the defensive side of the ball. Miscommunication issues have been a big problem here for the Broncos defense in the last 4 games. Where is that problem stemming from? We'll highlight that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. And as you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook in the NFL playoffs. They're almost here. We've got 1 week of regular season action left, but it's not too late to get in on all the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's right. If you sign up as a new customer here today, you place a $5 bet and your bet wins, you're going to get rewarded with $250 in bonus bets that you can use on the NFL playoffs. You can use on the NBA season as it's ongoing. There's so many things that you can do inside of the app. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W, and I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. You can hit the over-under. You can do the money line. You can cover the spread, or you can do anytime touchdown scores as well. You can even do parlays inside the app. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Even going up against the backups against the Kansas City Chiefs, the Denver Broncos, they have some communication issues that need to get fixed this coming week, and perhaps that could even vault them forward into the playoffs and maybe have some success defensively against one of the league's best offenses in Buffalo. But Broncos country, we don't want to put the cart before the horse here on Locked On Broncos. We're going to break down exactly what those communications issues have been defensively for the Denver Broncos, as well as what else we want to see from the defensive side of the ball going up against Kansas City this week. But thanks so much to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate all you everydayers out there, as well as all of those of you that have hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube and the growing audience there. Cody, let's talk about the communication issues for this Denver Broncos defense, because over the last 4 weeks, I think you and I and a lot of members of Broncos country have been asking similar questions. Like, this defense was, let's be fair, going into the LA game just a couple of, not even 2 weeks ago at this point as we're recording this, going into that game, they were tied for number 1 in the NFL in total points allowed. So, we're kind of trying to talk about the issues that have arisen in recent weeks. This has not necessarily been a, devastating problem all year, but there have been communication issues that have kind of been, here and there you see nuggets of it, but it's really reared its ugly head the more teams have gotten tape on this Denver defense.
Yeah, look, I think it all started really with the Cleveland Browns. They found a way to exploit and attack it a little bit. And more so the Cleveland Browns game, Sayre, was a Levi Wallace, getting torched in man coverage a few times. But there were issues with guys running crossing routes free underneath. And what's happening here with Denver, and look, I think that there is a lot of extracurricular anger and animosity being placed towards Justin Sternad. Look, I think when you look at the result as it's happening in the game, it's easy to be like, oh, he was the nearest guy there. He was the nearest guy covering him. He's getting torched. I think the scheme has probably been the bigger issue with the inside linebackers. It's not necessarily a personnel issue, because what's happening, and teams are keying in on this. If you go back and you look at that Bengals game specifically, at times where Jaquan McMillan is blitzing, you're vacating because you got you're going to have a single receiver to one side, or you may have, a receiver and a tight end, or as Cincinnati had sometimes, they'd have a wing player that would be underneath the formation, but you're blitzing Jaquan McMillan. And then, so you're locking up man to man on the outside with that corner and the number 1 receiver. And then you have leakage to the outside. So that means that essentially, if you have a zone covered, like a zone coverage called, right? The rule is always going to be if you're a corner, if you have one receiver to your side, you got to play him as man, even if you're in zone coverage, right? So if you get a vertical roll out, that's going to clear out the corner. But then it's like you're in zone. So now Justin Sternad or Cody Barton, they're going to have to play that curl to hook. And then that means that the other linebacker is going to have to go replace that middle hook there if they're playing zone. That's where teams are really trying to attack the Broncos. And so for me, I think my biggest thing, Sarah, when I go back and I watch the film here, part of me feels like Vance Joseph, did he show all of his cards too early on in the season with how all the different pressure looks that we're seeing the Broncos throw at different teams and all the blitz looks with the linebackers and the nickels or this? I don't remember the last time I've seen a safety blitz. When was the last time we've seen Brandon Jones or PJ Locke on a blitz to where they come close to getting home? No, they've been really just kind of just playing back there. And the linebackers, the inside guys, they have been blitzing quite a bit. And so offenses have been piecing together that because in man coverage, one of those linebackers, they're always going to be covering a tailback out of the backfield. So when you have a running back who's lined up to the left of the quarterback in shotgun, okay, you're going to get one linebacker there. But the rule is going to be if that guy swings out, you got to play him as man. If that guy goes across the other side of the formation, it's the other inside linebacker, or it's going to be the safety's responsibility there. But what happens when you have a tight end? If you have twins or trips to one side, then it changes the communication stuff. Like if you've seen, like even on that early touchdown where there was, I think T. Higgins' first touchdown of the game, he runs a slant, and it's like, wait, where's the coverage there? You have two guys doubling Yasovis for the Bengals there, and you've got no help inside against T. Higgins. To me, it was the wildest thing ever. And it's all miscommunication because of motion, because of formation changes. So they're either not checking out of plays or their rules, or they have too many rules that they have to think about pre-snap. And that, I think, is what's causing the Broncos defense to struggle, and especially with the communication, because Sarah, what personnel has changed with this team? I know Riley Moss missed 3 games, but really personnel has not changed for them defensively from week 1 to now.
Yeah, that's the most staggering thing
Singleton.
to me is, Singleton, obviously, but he only played 3 games, right? So it's been the majority of the season without him. And my question, based on what you're saying, would be this: like for a quarterback that's coming in ice cold, like Carson Wentz, and even if the Chiefs end up playing, their practice squad quarterback out there, is it more to the Broncos' benefit to try to get home with 4 guys or 5 guys, as opposed to say, hey, we've been the highest rate of blitzing team other than the Vikings all year long? Do we want to stick with that strategy and attack these quarterbacks, or do you want to drop as many guys into coverage as you can and think that you can get home with 5 or 4 even against these quarterbacks? Because what's going to make them think more? What's going to cause them more confusion out there? Because these guys, let's be honest, like they could come out and have a otherworldly game. They could start making throw after throw. What's going to confuse the quarterback more? Is it going to be sending guys at him, or is it going to be maybe showing blitz looks and dropping guys into coverage?
I think you're going to have to, you can't change who you are, I think, like in terms of your defense, but there's got to be reflection from the coaching staff is like, all right, we're doing the same things that we had, but now that, they got Riley Moss back and Riley had a rough game. I think Riley will bounce back, but the reality is like, you can't change who you are philosophically. And if all of a sudden, like Vance Joseph made that comment a couple of weeks ago about, we're this late in the season, teams know the warts that you have on defense. Well, it's on you as a coach to adjust to those warts, to remove those warts, and to put your players in a position where teams aren't going to attack that. So for me, I don't know where the true issue really lies. Like you have to be aggressive at times, right? But are you going to be as aggressive against these guys as you were against Joe Burrow? Because the reality is, you give Joe Burrow so much time to throw, he's going to carve you up. You give Justin Herbert so much time to throw, he's going to carve you up. Same thing with Patrick Mahomes. You give him so much time, he's going to carve you up because you can't cover. Like it's so hard to cover that long from a secondary standpoint. Not only just being a linebacker and half the coverage, you have to respect scramble drill. Like you have to maintain the length of your coverage. The average NFL play, I think it's somewhere around, it lasts like 4.3, 4.2 total seconds. If you have to extend that out by even 2 seconds, that's asking a lot for anybody, especially when some of the fastest guys in the NFL, like the Chiefs, a good portion of their key stars on offense and defense won't play, but there's still going to be Juju Smith-Schuster, Sarah, who's probably going to play in this game. McCole Hardman, I think he's on IR if I'm not mistaken, so I don't know if he's going to play. But you're going to be going up against guys like Noah Gray, Justin Watson. Like these guys can still hurt you. These guys have played plenty of football.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the Broncos mentality has to be, is that once again, as we've said on this show multiple times, like, you've got to go out there and be the aggressor. You've got to make them look like backups. And that's just how many times have we gone into games this season feeling like so confident about it and then being worried the closer you get to game time, right? The New Orleans Saints game, everybody, I mean, were the Broncos, they were favored in that game, but I mean, there was a lot of discussion in the fan base at the time, like, don't underestimate Spencer Rattler. Don't underestimate the Saints team, even without Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara. They've still got guys who can make plays. Like, you've got to go out there and you've got to actually prove that you are the big boys on the field, right? And the Broncos starters, they hung with the Chiefs. They should have beat them. That's the reality. And so I think that right now there's a lot of worry and walking on eggshells in Broncos country because of the fact that this is a do or die now situation. Now we're in the playoffs. We're no longer, hey, you've got another chance next week. Oh, okay, well, you still got one more chance next week. There's no more chances at this point. So because of that, the stakes are so much higher, and it feels like, man, the Chiefs, they could still, whoever's out there could still do Carson Steele. It's going to be the Carson Bowl out there for Kansas City. Those guys are that's who's going to play this game is Carson Wentz, Carson Steele,
Kareem Hunt.
Those guys are, it's not going to be all the recognizable Chiefs, but you've got to go out there and shut this down. And if you're the Denver defense, what an opportunity right before the playoffs to maybe get your kind of groove back a little bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. Broncos country, want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on what Denver should do to adjust their defensive issues that they've had? What is the biggest complaint that you've seen so far? Make sure you drop it in there as you're listening or watching Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast. But we're going to wrap up today's show by highlighting what we feel like the coaches need to do in this final game of the regular season, the only game that the Broncos have guaranteed remaining this year unless they win on Sunday. We'll break that down and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here's a special offer for listeners of Locked On Broncos and for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. We're jumping into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, to bring Broncos country into the new year. Hopefully, Denver can start 2025 with a playoff appearance, but that won't be possible unless they beat the Kansas City Chiefs here on Sunday, 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time kickoff on CBS. Jim Nantz, Tony Romo, you get the A-team for this big game, even if Kansas City may not be playing players like Patrick Mahomes. And for Broncos head coach Sean Payton, he said it earlier this week. He says, we're going to prepare for their scheme. And look, you're going to be watching film based on the players that are there. And if there's a different player there, so be it. So you are preparing a lot for the scheme here. And I think you and I kind of laid the question out. How much does the scheme for Kansas City's offense change when Carson Wentz is in versus Patrick Mahomes? I mean, Mahomes has way more autonomy than I feel like a guy like Carson Wentz would. I think Carson Wentz would probably have to play a little bit more under structure of what Andy Reid wants. When you have a guy like Mahomes, you can get away with a lot of different things. And I think that's what makes Patrick Mahomes a very dangerous player to go against, because he is good at improvising. He is good at taking advantage of that. How many times have we seen like a 3rd and 15, and then he scrambles for 20 yards on 3rd and 15? He's done it against Denver. He's done it against a handful of other teams. So that'll be something that Denver won't necessarily have to account for. But Carson Wentz is also a guy who can be mobile enough to use his legs. I don't know if he's as fast or as athletic anymore as a guy like Patrick Mahomes is. I know he used to be before his ACL injury that he had years ago that dethroned the Eagles, his path with the Eagles, and then Nick Foles won the Super Bowl for them. But it all boils down this week, I think, to coaching, Sayre. And look, obviously the players are on the field. They have to execute. but it's on the coaches to put all of these guys in a position to succeed. And at times I feel like that hasn't always been the case here. So for you, what do you want to see from the Broncos coaching staff here in Sunday's game?
Well, I think the first and foremost thing that I want to see, Cody, is no more playing not to lose, right? Because Sean Payton talked about it after the game, and he talked about it again early in the week of just like, yeah, we knew that the tie was an option going into an overtime period. And to me, like, that's okay. I mean, I understand you want to give yourself as many paths to victory as possible, but how many times has a tie even happened around the league this year and over the last 2 years? Like, ties just don't really happen. So I think that I know that they maybe happen once or twice a season, but to bank on that as even a possibility is kind of like me,
Against
not
Joe
going to
Burrow?
yeah, against Joe Burrow. Absolutely. It's kind of like me going to McDonald's drive-through and being like, well, I mean, there's a chance I was going to only get a Diet Coke, but then I saw the menu and, I didn't. That's a terrible analogy, but I'm just
I'm going to
thinking
get a
about
high
a
C
diet.
instead.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a Diet Coke from McDonald's right now. But I mean, you can think of whatever analogy would best fit for that, because it's like one of those things that's like, oh, it's just not going to happen. Like, yeah, it's a possibility, but it's not going to happen. And so I just didn't like that. I think that gave them kind of this mentality of playing not to lose as opposed to playing to win, which there is a time that you don't want to go for broke. Like, if in this game in particular, if you're playing week 17 for a chance to go to the playoffs and you have the option of overtime or taking a 2-point conversion down by 1, that's a situation where you want to maybe really think about the cost of going for 2 in that situation. So I find it interesting that given they had this extra week here to say, hey, we've got another game that we could win, can we go 2 yards to get a win? I didn't like the idea of not playing to win there. And I think that kind of burned them play calling wise, as you've mentioned in previous shows this week throughout the course of that Bengals game.
Well, and look, and this is where I said we had a great mailbag question, I think, from someone in Broncos Country this week, and I answered over there at Mile High Sports as well, because they talked about like Sean Payton and play calling. And look, I think for Sean is a smart guy. He understands the game. He knows how to manipulate defenses. But I think the thing and the challenge of being a play caller sometimes is you have to go with the flow of the game. And obviously sometimes you get a little ahead of yourself. Like it is very hard. Like being a play caller often requires some ego. And look, Sean definitely has some of that, but it's not necessarily always a bad thing though. I would say for me, my biggest complaint is that I feel like there have been times this season where Sean has been too conservative, at times where he should be aggressive. And there's been times where he's been too aggressive and times where they should be conservative, right? That's the duality of being a play caller. So how do you find balance and how do you establish that trust? Like, I think a lot of it has to go with, can you delegate? Can you understand that? And Sean says he delegates and listens to ideas from his staff, but like in the heat of the game, like I'd be trusting like Pete Carmichael and Joe Lombardi up top. Like, hey, what are we seeing? What should we do here? Like, I love the nature and the desire to be aggressive here, right? But with this young team, with not having a legitimate player at the tight end position who can produce for you, the tight end threat is not a threat for opposing defenses that face the Broncos. They don't really game plan for Denver's tight ends. They're like, hey, let's keep everything in structure. Our biggest priority is stopping Cortland Sutton. So how do you find that balance there to say, all right, we need to get away from being one-dimensional. We need to figure out how, like, the run game's working. Okay, hey, if I rattle off, let's say Jaleel McLaughlin, exactly what happened against Cincinnati. He rattles off an 11-yard run. He rattles off a 13-yard run. Okay, it's 1st and 10. I'm okay with you taking a shot on the next play downfield. I like that because it's like, hey, they may think that you're going to run, but teams have played Denver to where, oh, they're not going to run. They don't like running the football. That's not what they do. And so they drop everyone back, and you can see it. They play to stop the pass here for Denver. And then I think that amplifies, a lot of the negative commentary that you get on Bo Nix from people that really don't know how to watch a football game and don't know what they're looking at and how a defense is playing. So for me, it's just like coaches have to paint a clearer picture here for the personnel and for the players. It starts on offense, and it also starts on defense, which we also talked about as well. But even special teams, like just being aware of the situation, right? Understand, like, hey, as the gunner, you got to watch that return guy. And I understand you're trying to track the football. Make sure you peek and try to watch because you got to see if there's a fair catch. You can't touch a guy. You can't give them an additional opportunity there to move the football up. That's just situational awareness. I think that has to be nailed down a little tighter this week.
Yeah, situational awareness, not having those terrible penalties in the most inopportune situations, right? That does come down to coaching. Ultimately, I mean, I know the players are out there. They're the ones that are doing some of this stuff, but man, you've got to have these guys ready for just to play a disciplined, clean game. And obviously, as we mentioned, Vance Joseph, him and his staff, they have to adjust to what teams are doing to them. Maybe the first time that Jim Leonard has come up in a while, the pass game coordinator on the defensive side for Denver. What can he do to help kind of fix this? Because obviously, if they did show their cards too early, as you mentioned, Cody, that's problematic against anybody. It doesn't matter backups or starters. It's problematic against any quarterback, any receivers, anything like that, because these guys, they are going to be able to hit crossing routes. They are going to be able to catch the ball if they're wide open. They're going to be able to run through open lanes. Like, that's the part that we're worried about right now, is that the Broncos are going to have lapses. And so how do you prevent those lapses? Your coaches have to have you absolutely ready for the exam that is to come here on Sunday afternoon for the Broncos.
What's the saying? Proper preparation prevents poor execution, or something along those lines there. Look, and I'll tell you this, by just being I think that the Broncos practice well. I think they have structure, and you hear so many players talk about that they feel like the structure that is created within the team and how they go about their day-to-day prepares them. And certainly I would say them being at 9 wins with not having as much around them as some of these other teams do and how some of these other quarterbacks do, I think that's a big benefit there. But like, this is it. Like, Sayre, we always talk about, you want to be playing your best football in the month of December. Denver certainly hasn't done that in the month of December. It's been honestly, you could say it's been the worst that they've played. And luckily they've won a couple of games, but they've lost 2 straight here. Backs against the wall now. You're entering the new year. Try to find a way to get that 10th win of the season. 10 wins get you into the postseason. You don't want to be hoping like, you have to be watching and hoping for other teams to come through. Because if you're trying to bank on the New York Jets to beat the Dolphins, good luck with that. Doesn't matter if it's Snoop Huntley, Skylar Thompson. Don't matter who's the quarterback for the Dolphins. Against that Jets team is checked out. They're dysfunctional. You cannot rely on that. And if that's what you're hoping for, it's not going to work out for you. So go out there, take it to them. Look, the throwback uniforms are going to be worn. I don't know if you saw, but they posted a picture of what the field's going to look like. The old school D logo in the middle of the field, orange end zones with the old school logos like that right there. That should get you fired up. It's going to be a chilly game, but the Broncos got to bring their A game here. And look, Broncos Country, you always bring your A game every single day that you listen to us here. So if you're not an everyday listener, make sure you become one, because every single day, all year long, we've got you covered with the best Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. I attend practices, games. Sayre and I, we've been plugged in for many, many years here in Broncos Country. We appreciate you so much for taking time out of your day to rock with us. Hope you have a happy new year. And hey, maybe you all wish for a successful 2025 campaign for the Broncos. And may that include a postseason appearance to start the year. That's the hope. We'll have you covered. Tomorrow's episode of the show, Sayre's going to sit down with Locked On Chiefs for a crossover episode to preview the game. And then we'll wrap things up on Friday with our final game preview, injury report, and everything that you need to know. Keys to victory, bold predictions, all that. You get that here. Locked On Broncos.